Today, I want to give you 5 tips to stop second guessing yourself and learn to trust your feelings and your intuition and be able to actually rely on those and confidently share them with conviction instead of having to overanalyze and double check. Is this okay? Is this right? Let me run it past all these internal filters and then maybe it's safe to share. Right? And so this will be especially useful if you're an introvert or a feeler type or an empath, highly sensitive person, any of those things. And also if you're an extrovert or a thinker type like me, this has also been a really useful skill set for me to build. So my first tip is around, what you're up against in the world today. We live in a dominant culture that really prioritizes the thinking mind, the analytical mind. It prioritizes extroversion, big loud voices. Whoever is loudest in the meeting or the social group gets heard, right? And so the person who's kind of quietly feeling their feelings and feels something with conviction, like, oh, this is actually important, maybe I should share this, it can feel like your voice is kind of drowned out by those other people. And so my first tip is to understand that even though an extroverted thinker type might seem like they know what they're talking about, they might seem like they're very logical, their arguments are well thought out, they're speaking loudly and confidently, and that means they believe in themselves and they have a position that's well grounded in some kind of authority, right? That a lot of that can be an illusion. And so I can tell you, speaking as an ENTP, which is, a type that is known as the debater. Like, we're really good at thinking on our feet, thinking fluidly, speaking eloquently, speaking quickly. What I can tell you is that very often I am thinking out loud. So sometimes I have well-prepared arguments, but sometimes I can speak in a loud voice with what sounds like a lot of conviction, but it's not actually a sign that I have carefully thought out this position that I'm arguing for. I'm just kind of trying things, throwing them out there with my mouth and seeing what sticks or what sounds right to me as I hear myself speak it. So if you're an introvert or a feeler and you're in the room with someone like me, I encourage you to recognize that just because you're hearing that person speak that way, I want you to not let that invalidate what feels true for you. And to just imagine the possibility that this person might sound like they know what they're talking about, but that your position might be equally valid, even if it feels like it's a quieter position. And so, that's one type of kind of extrovert talker type. There are also, some people who experience a lot of self-doubt or low confidence or, have a negative self-image, and they're kind of purposefully doing the opposite of speaking arrogantly, talking themselves up as a way of protecting themselves. So there are many different kind of coping strategies that people can use to try to keep themselves safe or try to make themselves feel better that involve being big. And so if you see someone being big, it's not necessarily a sign that they actually are really confident. It might be that they're hiding something or protecting something. So the second tip is to recognize that thinking wisdom and feeling wisdom are two equally valid types of wisdom. We happen to live in a culture today that really prioritizes the thinking mind, that prioritizes logic, but that has largely only been true for the past several hundred years since the Industrial Revolution, the Enlightenment. But for 10,000 years plus before that, a different kind of intelligence was prioritized. And it's easy to kind of look back at that and say, oh, well, that was just primitive. They didn't know what they were talking about. And nowadays we have science and intellect and logic, and that's way better. And that's not actually true. There's a lot I could say on this subject. But for now, I think one clear piece of evidence is just how many cognitive biases the thinking mind can succumb to. If you look up the Wikipedia article on cognitive bias, there are hundreds of them. And so it's easy to imagine that the thinking mind is kind of the more reliable one compared to the heart, compared to the intuition, compared to feelings. But the truth is that there are many, many ways that the analytical mind makes mistakes all the time. And I'll give you one clear example. As a management consultant that spent many years going into top companies, Fortune 500 tech companies, and advising them and working closely with teams on software development and things. There's something that happens in the tech world where when you're developing software, the managers will ask the developers or the engineers, how much work is this feature going to be? How long is it going to take to build this thing? And what the manager wants is a highly logical, analytical, quantified answer, right? How many hours is it going to take to build this feature? And they want the engineer to say, well, it's going to take 97 hours, right? That sounds nice. Then you can write that down in your report. You can put that on your analytics dashboard. All right, it's going to be exactly 97 hours. That sounds awesome. It sounds reliable, right? So the truth is it's a lie. It's made up. No human can accurately estimate it's going to be 97 hours, right? And so, sure, logic, analysis are valuable in the estimation process. But what's even more valuable is intuition. So the best process is when a group of engineers gets together and they throw out different numbers. One says, oh, I think it's going to be 50 hours. Someone else says, oh, it's going to be 55 hours. Someone else says 40 hours. And then, if you're a feeler type, if you're someone who's quieter and kind of a little less on that logical side, you might hear these numbers thrown out. Oh, 40 hours, 50 hours, 45 hours. But then you have this sense inside, like you can't really explain it. You're not really sure exactly why, but you feel like, those are way off. I think it's actually going to be more like 70 or 80 hours. And I can't explain, exactly where that number comes from. But, I've maybe worked in the software industry for a while now, and for some reason it just feels like it's going to be a lot more work. Right? That's really valuable. That's a really useful perspective to add to the room. Even though it seems like it's not driven by data, it's not driven by some exact science, logic, right? I think if it's a topic that you know something about, then you have this lived experience that informs your subconscious, and so this feeling bubbles up of like, this doesn't feel right. It's not quite right. That's such a valuable thing that you can add to that conversation. Because there's a lot of kind of parallel processing, advanced kind of wisdom that happens down there in the subconscious space. It's a subconscious mind, but it's more than that. It's your nervous system. It's your whole feeling space. That's especially true with relational issues. It can be helpful at work, but it's even more helpful when you're talking to your partner about something, and we'll get to that in a minute. And for subjective things like which restaurant do you want to eat at, right? There's no logical right answer. It's just which one feels more true. So one way of, tip number 3, one way of training this ability to trust your feelings is if you're trying to decide between two things, thing A or thing B, you take a coin and you say, okay, heads is A, tails is B. And you flip a coin and you pretend that the coin is dictating your decision. All right, so comes up heads, that means I have to do A. And the point is not that you have to do A. The point is you pretend that you have to do A, and you notice how you feel about that. Okay, so the coin is forcing me now to do A. How do I feel knowing that I have to do A? So you check, okay, maybe close your eyes. What does it feel like in my body knowing that I have to do choice A now? What does it feel like knowing that I'm not allowed to do choice B now? So just training yourself, you might want to repeat this exercise regularly. When you have small decisions to make, flip a coin, notice how it feels. Notice how it feels to get to do the one choice, and notice how it feels to miss out on doing the other choice. Tip number 4 is practice noticing the beginning of a feeling, just kind of the vague first sense of it. And, often it won't feel, when we're talking about logic and the analytical mind, it's going to be often it's going to feel like better proof, right? If you can logically lay out the argument, here are the numbers, here's the quantified metrics, this is is true, logically true, right? Then that feels like it's much more reliable. So it feels like the equivalent feeling would need to be a really thought out, complex feeling, right? But often that's not how it's going to work, especially if you're trying to do it in real time, right? Like sometimes it might take you a longer amount of time to really get clear on the full extent of your feeling. So maybe it's like a few hours later, you realize, oh, wow, earlier today, when that person said that, I was actually angry. Huh. Wow, I didn't realize at the time, but looking back, yeah, that was anger. Right? But that's too slow. And so you might not know in that moment when that person says that, oh, this is anger, okay, right? You might just notice the smallest sign. And so this tip is for you to practice noticing what are your small signs. And for me, I think some of the most reliable ones are, am I tensing? Am I loosening? Does it feel like I'm contracting or that I'm expanding? Right? So if someone gives you really good news, like, wow, I got us tickets to this concert for a band that you love. Notice what happens. Oh, wow. You feel yourself open up. You feel your shoulders broaden. You feel some brightness come into your face, your mouth, right? So try to practice noticing what is the very first sign that, oh, something good is happening. Or, you're checking your email and you see, oh no, there's a negative email. So notice what's the first sign that, oh, something's negative. Often it's kind of a contraction, like you're getting smaller, or you're leaning away from it, or there's kind of like a squeezing somewhere, or there's some like upset in your belly. So once you notice the more extreme versions of that, for kind of really bad news or really good news, then you can practice noticing the beginning signs. When there's something that's closer to neutral, does it feel more like that really bad thing or more like the really good thing? What's that first little signal of the feeling? And then tip number 5 is to practice sharing that out loud. So this can be especially helpful and doable with people you trust, right? So with close friends or with your partner, practicing sharing the very first sign that you notice. And so, from a relationship standpoint, often the partner will say something and you will feel some reaction, but it's not a super complex, well thought out one yet, right? It's just kind of the first inclination. And so it might feel like, well, I probably shouldn't share that yet because I haven't taken the time to really fully expand it, let all its complexity come out. So I might get it wrong, or, I should wait. I should share this later, right? But part of the problem with that is you lose the moment, right? Like right now is when that feeling is happening. And that's when it can be most connective to share, hey, this thing just happened. And that can kind of bring you closer together to share that vulnerability. Whereas if you wait 3 days and you say, hey, by the way, 3 days ago when you said that thing, that made me angry. That's better than nothing. But I think it's really helpful to get in the habit of sharing feelings as soon as possible while they're still alive in you. And, it's a fine line where if you're feeling some like rage bubbling up inside you, maybe you don't want to share that right away. Maybe you want to go take a walk and take some deep breaths and let that dissipate a bit before you share, so that it's coming from a bit of a more grounded place. You've kind of let things settle a little and you're not lashing out. But for other types of feelings, like if you're feeling just the beginnings of sadness or loneliness or disconnection from someone, that can be more valuable to share right away. And so I want to encourage you to practice sharing the bare minimum. So one example is just saying, that didn't feel good or that did feel good. So someone says something and you're not really sure why it didn't feel good, but just practicing saying like, ooh, yeah, what you said just now didn't feel good. Or, wow, that really felt good to hear you say that. Thank you. And even if you can't articulate more than that, what was good about it, right? Who knows? But I just want to let you know, wow, I really liked hearing that. Thank you. And for the negative, even just something like, ouch. Ah. And maybe that's kind of weird if you've never, if you haven't talked about that before, but you could try telling your partner, like, hey, I'm practicing sharing my feelings. So is it okay if I just share something that might be kind of strange and confusing, but I just want to get in the habit of sharing the smallest amount that I'm noticing. Is that okay? And if they say, sure, yeah, you can practice on me, then you can practice sharing just like these really small snippets. Like, um, oh, yeah, I noticed when this happened just now, it made me feel kind of further away from you. I'm not really sure what happened there, but I noticed like it feels like we're kind of a little less close in that moment, and I'd like to be closer to you. So it's kind of practicing just naming what you're experiencing. And this takes a lot of practice. I've spent years working on this skill as a thinker type who spent most of my life in my head. It's taken a lot of work to practice this. But again, really start small, just noticing these really small signals like, oh, there's a little tension in my chest, or oh, my shoulders contract a little. Right? So the more you practice these small things, the more that you'll learn to trust that your feelings, that your intuition are valuable, that they're offering something useful, and then you can practice sharing them with confidence. And the more you do that, the more you can trust that your feelings are just as valid as someone else's logic or rationality. All right, so the 5 tips again are remember that extroverts often think out loud, or they're just trying things on verbally, or they're protecting something. So just because someone is loud and seems to know what they're talking about doesn't mean that's actually true. And just because you're quiet or more feelings oriented does not mean that what you're feeling is less valid than what they have to offer. And then number 2 is recognizing that the thinking mind and the feeling heart, the feeling self, are just 2 different forms of intelligence, and neither one is better or worse. And the thinking mind can succumb to many different cognitive biases as well. So it's unfair to say that the thinking mind is far more reliable than the intuition. Tip number 3 is to practice training your feeling sense by flipping a coin for simple decisions and noticing how you feel about the outcome. Tip number 4 is to notice the beginning of a feeling, the first signals of something, even if you don't feel the full kind of explanation of what's going on for you. And then tip number 5 is to practice sharing that with people that you trust, people you feel safe with. And the more you practice, the more that you'll be able to share that kind of thing with people who are less safe, or even in work settings, because often, again, in my experience, even working with top teams, there's a lot of kind of pretending or acting as if quantified metrics and the analytical mind are always perfectly reliable, but that's just not true. Often, the person who says, I can't explain it, but I've got a gut feeling that something's off here, that can often be the most valuable voice in the room. So I encourage you to, maybe if it's something that you have never done before, you don't have any experience with it, maybe you don't trust your gut as much. But if it's something that you've done something like that many times before, then that's a great idea to trust your gut, to trust your intuition, and to feel like even if you can't explain why, that you do have something valuable to offer. All right? So practice those things. I'd love to hear which of those resonates most with you, and how this goes. So please share in the comments, and I hope you have a nourishing day.